Welcome to KLEAN Radio. How are you doing, Judah?
I am good, and you are not good. You are sick.
I am sick, yes. I was very sick last week, and I'm sort of sick tonight.
But like a trooper, you decided to come in, and you know, you're in your boxing outfit.
That's right. I'm in my sick boxing outfit. It's like transition quickly from bed to the car to radio host.
But your wife took care of you.
She did.
That's why it's good to have a wife.
Well, one of the reasons.
And what else? So it's not your cold urticaria.
My cold urticaria.
Your cold urticaria.
I know you love talking about it.
I do love talking about it. It's an affliction that hits people. What is it?
I'm actually allergic to temperature change.
Temperature change.
Yeah, so when things get cold, I break out in hives.
Is there a support group for anything like that?
No, not yet.
There could be like a 12-step group.
Be me and like two other people, I think.
Have you found anybody else that has that?
Actually, there's a couple people that I diagnosed that didn't know what they had, and I was able to tell them what it was.
In chat rooms or?
No, this was all pre-sort of internet, and since then I've only heard of one other person, so I've only heard of 3 people that have had it.
Why don't you start a forum?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, I guess. It's, you know, when I first found out about it, I was actually, nobody knew what it was, none of the doctors, they thought I had a food allergy or whatever, and I ended up being in Cambridge, England at Cambridge Medical School. My dad was on a tour, he's a biophysicist, and he was there speaking, I believe, and a friend of ours was in Cambridge Medical School there, and he goes, "Oh, you have cold urticaria." And we're like, "What's that?" And he's like the only guy that knew. And it turned out they didn't have any treatment for it, but then it turns out now they have very strong antihistamines that are good. So
very interesting.
Yeah.
And the number here is 877-8-830-830. That's 877-8-830-830. This is a show about
not cold urticaria.
Not cold urticaria. What are we about?
We're about addiction and recovery,
which is very topical right now. Yeah. Extremely topical.
We seem to actually be the hot topic on with Charlie Sheen and, you know, whatever, with Dr. Drew coming out now with a show on Headline News.
Oh, Dr. Drew has another show?
I believe it's starting in April, yeah.
It's called I Am a Whore.
Oh, no. That's really wrong.
I will do anything for money.
I don't think his intentions are that bad.
Well, the views of what I say are my own views.
Well, let's make sure that's clear. Yeah. Well, we've got an interesting night tonight, and I'm glad that even though I feel a little under the weather, I could be here for tonight's show. We have some great guests.
We have a person with a wiki page.
That's right.
That's like a hard thing to get. And we're in the studio with Lowell Cauffiel.
Not if you write it. Write your own wiki page.
One second. Did you write your own wiki page?
I've edited my own wiki
page. But you have to have a certain something to get a wiki page.
Yeah, you've got to at least be, I think, in the Library of Congress or be arrested a few times.
So you wrote your own wiki profile?
And I've done both. I've been arrested a few times. And,
so you have 2 wiki pages?
No, I have just 1 wiki page. But it first went up, I think my publisher first put it up, and I've amplified it and corrected it.
Because that's a hard thing to get. I know that it's not an easy thing to get as a wiki page. You can't just be, I know somebody recently, the reason I say that, I know somebody recently that was trying to get a wiki page and they could not get,
Barry Robinson, who's Smokey Robinson's son, who's a friend of mine, he has more on his wiki page than you can imagine, and it's like they knew there's the name of his dog when he was young, and like things that you would never things that he didn't even remember. So it gets a little scary. There's a line between, some information and then where it gets kind of over the top.
And Lowell is an amazing author and one of the preeminent crime novelists of probably the last 20 to 30 years.
Well, nonfiction crime.
Nonfiction crime writers.
As a crime novelist, I did three crime novels, but didn't have the success with those that I've had with nonfiction. And some of my nonfiction crime books, or true crime books as they used to be called, are on like a lot of the top 25 lists of all time.
Right. Well, what got my attention was that I saw you on Forensic Files one night, not as the subject of the show, but as one of the books he wrote. 2 of the books you wrote were used in cases on Forensic Files.
Yeah, I've been on Forensic Files, MSNBC, A&E. I'm the only author who's ever been on A&E with a mullet. I went through a stage where I was riding a Harley Davidson around the country for a couple of years, and then A&E came into town, or the producers did, and wanted to do this thing, and And I went and did all the interviews, and then when it came on, my teenage son at the time said, "Dad, you're on TV with a mullet." And I did. I had an actual mullet.
So was it business in the front, party in the back, or was it just party all over?
No, it was business.
So you were like the real rebel Truman Capote.
No, it was a Euro mullet. A Euro mullet, as classified by Mullets Galore. Which is a great website. I would recommend to anybody. Mullets Galore. They've got thousands of mullets taken all across the country, and they have them classified. Like, they have the woman mullet. They have something called a dykullet.
Is that for, like, mullet fetishes, I guess?
I guess. It's a popular website. I think it does some pretty good business.
And so you had a mullet galore. When was this?
No, I wasn't on Mullets Galore, but my son directed me. Yeah, my son directed me to Mullets Galore, and I found my mullet on there, and it was a Euro mullet.
What year was this?
Oh, God, this was in the 90s. And then, I got a phone call from the 70s, and they said, we want your hairstyle back, and I cut it.
So you're in one of the support groups, one of the 12-step groups. Were you in that at the time, or were you sober with a mullet?
Yeah, I was sober with a mullet. It shows you a vision for you.
That's even more fascinating to me.
Yeah. No, I've got 26 years. 26 continuous years.
So you rode around the country. He's got a cool bike, by the way. Not a scooter like me. He's actually got a motorcycle.
Yeah, 87 Harley Davidson FXR. Yeah.
And you rode around America on it?
I got to some interesting places, like the 95th anniversary of Harley Davidson. When my dad died, he left it to me, and I jumped on it the day after his funeral, drove it to his grave, laid it down around his grave, and did what's called a pinwheel, which is you tear up the grass with the rear wheel, and signed his grave with his own motorcycle, and literally was on that bike for the next 2 years.
Wow.
It was a really interesting journey, in fact, because I kind of discovered him through his motorcycle and got a relationship with him after his death that I never really had, when we were alive, because he was kind of this bigger-than-life individual. So, yeah, it was in fact, I did a book proposal for a book called Miles to Go. It's a Miles to Go Before I Sleep. And we took it to New York, my agent, and had meetings with all these publishers, and they kept saying, but people who ride motorcycles don't know how to read. And even though I presented statistics that 75% of Harley-Davidson owners have at least a bachelor's degree and made at least $75,000 to $125,000 a year. And in the Getty Museum at the time, they had 100 Years of the Motorcycle exhip. I still couldn't convince these editors that anybody would read it. Yeah.
But yet they have no problem picking up a show called Swamp People.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's funny because we were talking about that on the ride in.
We were.
I found myself yesterday watching this show called How Do They Make It? And literally I was watching How Do They Make Paintbrushes?
I think it's called How It's Made.
How It's Made.
Yeah.
And I felt really sorry for myself. I felt that I have hit a new low in my life.
Now, what is Swamp People? This is the second time I've heard today about Swamp People. What is Swamp? I haven't seen that one.
It's a show about, I guess it's about a family that lives on a swamp.
In Louisiana.
Yeah. I didn't know that until you just said that, and it's this whole what is it like? I guess it's the Travel Channel or it's Nat Geo. It's like it's in the 285, 284 on DirecTV because I'm addicted to Investigation Discovery. Great channel.
Well, thank God they're not calling it Wetlands People, and they're calling it Swamp People because that's what we used to call wetlands or swamps in Michigan, where I'm from.
That's. Yeah, but and it's like, and you wonder though, why wouldn't they? That's the amazing thing about this town is that Tony Dennison, and Tony Dennison, who was on the show. He always says whenever he pitches, he would always love the people that pitched, Hogan's Heroes, because if you could pitch a prisoner of war, a comedy about a prisoner of war in World War II, and you could get that show on the air, that's who I want pitching for me. But there's no rhyme or reason to anything. Because I love that idea about you traveling with your Harley.
Yeah.
And you were sober at the time.
Yes, absolutely. I think the greatest pitch of all time was Cop Rock. To convince a network that we're going to have a police show like an opera with cops singing, that to me is, I want that guy pitching for me. In fact, I know who it is that pitched the show. But
I want Dr. Vegas guy because I've always been fascinated. I've always thought about that pitch. What was it? Well, we got a doctor.
Right.
Think the Love Boat in Vegas.
But that's the great thing about sobriety is, when you've kind of taken a trip through the underside of the world as an addict or an alcoholic, and then you get sober. I found that I'm willing to try so many different things because I think, well, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? Well, the worst thing already has possibly happened in my life, and I was able to recover from it. So why should I shy away from, like, getting on a bike for 2 years, or, you know, if I've got the resources to do it, or take chances in my career? You know, I mean, I came out to Los Angeles 8 years ago, left the book business, and, you know, I'm pitching TV. I've sold quite a few pilots and some films, and everybody said, "You're out of your mind. You know, you're 50 years old. You're moving to Los Angeles from your home base." And I thought, well, what are they going to do? Make me drink? You know?
Right.
Well, so I find very, you know, it's one of those things that I've always been fascinated by is people always, because we were talking about this actually before the show, you know, the idea of musicians, that you need to be a drinker to be a you know, like some of my best music was written drunk. Right. Which not that my personally, because I can't write music, but you hear that constantly. Like, I can't write if I'm not, like, my creativity is stirred.
The Bukowski image,
right, right, or
right.
You know, Hunter. So you've written so much.
Well, you know, I used to sit on the end of a bar stool in a place called the Anchor Bar. It was the newspaperman's bar, because I started out in journalism. I spent 15, 16 years with the Detroit News, which at the time was the biggest African daily in the country. Huh. And very heavy drinker, you know, half a gallon of Jim Beam a day. You know, the alcoholic equivalent of a wake and bake. I had to have a couple of drinks in the morning. And when I discovered the morning drink, I thought that I discovered the Holy Grail.
Right, I think everybody has that.
Yeah,
that
I don't have to be hungover.
Right,
I can just keep going. You know?
Right,
and
I can actually drink in the morning.
Yeah, and I can recall so clearly sitting on the end of that bar stool, looking in the mirror, and thinking about all the books that I would, you know, perhaps would one day write, but I needed to suffer. And they had all the dead newspaper men in pictures above the top of this bar, because it was a newsman's bar, and people used to say it's the dead drunks looking down at the live drunks. Huh. And but I never wrote a book there, you know.
Right.
I never accomplished really anything there. I never got fired. I was winning awards, but they were all second place and third place, you know, newspapering and feature awards and stuff like that. And then when I got sober, 8 months into it, I had my first book contract. Suddenly I was writing books. So that's an illusion or a delusion that you have to suffer, or there has to be some kind of like chemical involved or whatever to get to that creative spot. I've often wondered, like, what would Hemingway have done if he had been sober? I mean, because in the end, the reason he blew his head off is he just didn't have to, you know, he didn't have the...
He was just done.
He didn't have the mojo anymore. You know, he had writer's block. But well, I'd have writer's block, too, if I was drinking as much as he was for that many years. You know?
Actually, mind block.
Yeah, exactly. So... yeah, I mean, there's so many lies that I told myself, you know. Mm-hmm. You would drink, too, if you had to go to homicide scenes. You know, you would drink, too, if you had to interview victims of tragedies like I did when I was in the news business. But, you know, if you look around the whole spectrum of things, yeah, you know, the construction worker drinks because, you know, he puts a hard day in on a job. My dad used to say bricklayers drink a lot because there's a lot of lime in the mortar and their mouth gets real dry, you know.
Right.
And doctors drink because they have so much responsibility of life and death. And assemblymen, you know, auto assemblymen drink a lot because their job is boring. And you can go right down the line, you know. You know, homeless people drink because they got nothing else to do.
Right. Everybody's got an excuse.
Everybody's got an excuse, right? And it's part of that old idea that you tell yourself for all that time. But I mean, today I don't even know how I'd work it into my schedule. I don't know where it would even fit in.
Well, you probably wouldn't even be in L.A.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd probably be about 6 feet.
Right. Or you'd still be at the Anchorman bar.
Or my liver would be on display, you know, at the coroner's office as, you know, the liver that could, you know.
Right.